confuse an argument when you're in it? I'm Bill Pietsch, and I'd like to welcome you to Perceptions, another in a series of programs where we seek to better understand ourselves, who we are as human beings in today's world. Our topic today is the dynamics of listening. And we have with us two people who have studied a great deal about listening and have worked in this area for a number of years. First, Judy Haims, who has studied the application of brain research to behavior and learning. And then Joyce Kinney, who is the Director of Perceptive Listening at Wainwright House in New York, in Rye. And both of them have worked at Wainwright House, and you also work at the Mead School in Greenwich. I thought it might be useful if we started out with something very practical here of actually what happens in listening. And I thought we might play a part of a father and a daughter and getting into the kind of argument we sometimes hear around a home, perhaps about keeping a room clean. And maybe, Joy, you could observe this and make some comments about what you hear and see what we can learn about it. Judy, what are you going to do about keeping your room clean? I've just about had it with you.
My room looks great to me. I like it this way.
It doesn't look great to me.
I know where everything is. This is my room, and I love it this way.
But this is my house, and I'm going to keep my house the way I want to keep my house.
Well, this is my room. What's mine in this house? Do I get anything here, or is it all yours? Is it yours and Mom's, or is it mine?
It belongs to your parents, not to you.
Well, I like the room this way, and anyway, I need to go right now, so...
It looks like a pigsty, and you're going to have to clean this up.
Oh, I can't do it now, Dad. I got to go. Bye.
Okay, any comments about that,
First
Joy?
comment is it sounds just like home. Right? I think it's a pretty common, this sort of thing that happens. The thing that I noticed was that your starting off was accusing and authoritarian, and in terms of listening, those are both no-nos. You know, I don't know, surely you want her to listen to you, but I think it's a two-way street, and in order for her to listen to you, you need to be listening to her too. Judy, I noticed that you spoke from yourself, from your I, which is a very open and honest way of communicating, and certainly reveals where you are. I heard you talking out of this is how it ought to be. It was a matter of principle rather than I, Bill, feel this way about it. So I'm certain that the conversation can only escalate under those conditions. Maybe you could do it again, and both of you try to listen to the other one, perhaps to acknowledge what you hear the other person say before you go on. This sounds a little artificial because it's a way of slowing it down, but it sometimes turns out to be very effective, particularly in such a hot topic.
All right, well, let's give it a try and see what happens.
Okay.
Okay.
Judy, what are you going to do about keeping your room clean here?
What I see by your face is that you're really, really upset, Dad. I guess you don't like the way I keep my room.
It's interesting how my feelings came down as soon as she said that she understood how I was feeling.
Right.
I could
can you acknowledge
that.
her now then?
Okay. You feel that this is your room and that you have a right to keep it the way you want. Is that what you're saying?
Oh boy, yeah, yeah. I see, Dad. I can look around my room and I know, I know where my tapes are, and I know where my books are, and I know no one else would find them here.
You notice the change in her voice as soon as she heard you acknowledge what she was asserting? Her voice went down about several notes, and she leaned forward and she was in it, she was involved. She wasn't defending, well, it's my room and I'm going to keep it the way I want to, and don't I have anything in this, I think it's a very interesting demonstration right off the bat of what happened, and you're willing to slow down the pace if you're committed not to escalate. Now, if what you want to do is just bat each other over the head with loud voices, fine, but doesn't usually result in much change.
It felt really good. I felt the opening. I felt that you were really interested in me, that you had noticed me, and it felt like this was my opportunity to explain to you who I am. And so I saw it as a real opportunity to get to know.
I wonder what
Right.
would happen if you had an opportunity to explain what it was like in the home in which you grew up as far as keeping rooms neat is concerned. You want to share that with her?
Yeah.
See what that does?
Okay. When I was a child, my father saw that I kept my room absolutely clean, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts. It was that was done, and I was expected to do it. And that's how I feel that I want to train you to be the kind of person who takes care of things.
Yeah, I can understand why, if that's where your dad did it and that's what you're doing. But it's different times now, Dad. We're living at a faster pace, and there's a lot going on, and I do other things. I do a lot of other things, and I don't have time. I'll get to it. I'll get to my room sometime, but I can't do it right now. I really can't. And I really hear that you think it should be done that way. If you have a lot of time sometime, I'd love to really discuss this with you.
Okay, I'm hearing you say you will talk about this some other time with me then.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dad. Thanks a lot.
Good. I notice when you come to the agreement to talk about it later, sometimes that can just be a put-off. But if you can say within the next 24 hours, and then you really commit, you make a mutual commitment that we will take time to do that when one is not just ready to leave and meet her friends.
That was
that
poor
makes
timing on the father's part in that
yes,
situation.
he came in, well,
Yeah.
maybe he didn't know she was about to leave, but it was probably the moment at which he felt most angry about it and zapped, without consideration about what she
Well,
was doing.
I think that is what happens with parents, is they see something that looks like, quote, irresponsibility, and so they attack at the moment because the room triggers, I may not be raising a responsible kid here, and especially if the kid's going out.
I'm not a good parent.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot that triggers the anger, and the communication of that anger can be tremendously powerful in terms of what happens between father and daughter, or it can be a disaster.
I know you work a lot with teenagers, and this business of self-esteem seems to have a big effect on how we hear things. Even in this example, the father's self-esteem about having this room right, and the girl's self-esteem about leaving and being with her friends and this sort of thing.
Right. This teenager had a lot of self-esteem, so much so that she didn't get hooked into feeling threatened the second time. The first time she surely did. And that's a very real part of it. If we feel like we're defending, then we will, or if we feel like we're being attacked, then we'll always defend. So approaching someone that you really want to listen to you needs not to feel like an attack, because the response from a very deep part of the brain is, I will defend myself. I will pull back, and I will either put up a wall or I'll attack back. So the way you approach someone, if you really want communication, is tremendously important, especially teenagers.
The problem is self-esteem both ways, though.
In fact, it really
if
is.
I come my self-esteem, it's got to be right. That's one thing. And if you deal with your self-esteem and you feel good enough to
Right.
you can say things and listen, that helps the other way too.
Yeah, I do think that exchanges between people, communication between people who both have their sense of self with them, even in conflict, which are times that I think are tremendously difficult to hear the other person. If you're sure that you're there, and you're sure they're going to be there when it's over, then there's a different kind of solution. There's a different kind of exchange around the conflict than if you feel like you may be, shriveled up into a little ball when it's over. So the approach is very important, I think, in
As a
listening.
marriage and family therapist, I think that people argue more about love than about anything else. They wonder if they're loved by the other person.
Absolutely.
And gets to that self-esteem area.
Exactly, and I think that is sort of a search of human beings: is am I enough, and am I loved enough?
Yeah.
So the sense of self, going into discussions with, no matter what the outcome, even in board meetings and corporations, being willing to take yourself in there as a sort of a whole, safe self, opens up listening in ways in which you feel like you're going to be attacked. You're not defended. That's the
But it
clearest way of
takes a
saying
lot of listening to yourself in order to develop that inner confidence, self-esteem, whatever you're talking about. That's an important part of our growing, I think, that we don't usually take time for. Listening to ourselves in terms of how I respond to things, what are my assumptions about certain things, what are the things that I am telling myself about myself. This relates to the self-esteem too.
Absolutely.
But we usually just live out that self-esteem without being aware of what it is. So exercises or activities that would tend to make us be more aware of our own self-esteem or lack thereof and where it comes from, like you're mentioning from your family and how you were brought up, can be done through journal writing, can be done through various kinds of activities where you examine yourself and just watch, be more aware.
That's tremendously important, I think, that the whole idea of perceptions, what I already perceive, what my value system and my beliefs already are, because I think we listen very often differently depending on what belief system we have. If I believe that I'm going to be rejected, and my pattern in, actually I have a part of my brain that stores all these patterns and belief systems, and if I believe that rejection is an issue, then you may come at me saying some wonderful thing like, Judy, I have to go now, I have a meeting, and you may look a little rushed, and I may not hear, Judy, I have to go now. I might hear, oh, there he goes rejecting me again. And the program is called Perceptions, and I think listening is so connected to what perceptions that we already have. And how can you know what mine are? You don't know my family issues. So here I am left feeling rejected, and all you did was leave the room. So the way we listen to one another from this is tremendously important, I think.
This spring we had in the course, one of the courses that I was teaching, I came across a single sheet of 2 columns. One column was traditional assumptions, and the other column was your rights, your personal rights. And these were all given in single sentence statements with the opposites, you know, down the 2 columns. And I asked the people just to read this and see if there were any of them to which they responded, that they identified with. And there was this silence for a few minutes, and then somebody tentatively spoke up and said, is there anybody else in the room here who's recognizing all of these? And about 6 hands went up, you know. And then, of course, we had a wonderful laugh, because it is so true that there are a lot of cultural assumptions that get kind of programmed into us that go into this sense of self-esteem and who we are. And they're like false beliefs. I mean, it isn't just that the culture is changing, it is that they've always been false. They certainly do not lead us to believe that we are lovable and capable people. And so we had a wonderful time with that. But that's what I'm talking about when I mean being aware, because something like that can bring it up to you so that the next time you tell yourself one of those assumptions, one of those cultural beliefs, you say, oh, there that is again. Yeah, I recognize that, but I don't need to believe that. I can act out of this other belief. And that's very freeing when it comes to listening and communicating.
It seems like we listen to ourselves in 2 different ways. Sometimes a very positive thing where we can tune in on what our perceptions are and maybe our prejudices from the past and that sort of thing. But there's also another time where we're kind of listening to ourselves and not really listening to the other person. And I wonder if you could comment about how do you listen with what's going on with you and also the other person at the same time.
I think you're the...
Intermittently. That can be demonstrated very quickly. See, I believe in learning by experience rather than by talking about it. So there are these various activities that we do by which we can experience what it is that we're learning firsthand, through our bodies, through our feelings, through our thoughts all together. And there's one very quick one that which we listen to one another for a very brief time, preferably someone we don't know very well. And then we are asked a series of questions about that person that had nothing to do with what we were talking about. And the surprising thing is how many of those questions the persons can answer about the other one that they've been talking to. Though it's never come up, they get the answers right, like 8 out of 10 times. And so, well, what's been happening? You know, do you think you've just been sitting there listening in this conversation? You're listening on different levels, and we are all listening on different levels at the same time. My belief, and I don't know this much about the brain, is that it switches very quickly back and forth between the levels, and you can be aware of 3 levels at once without much difficulty if you just set your mind to do it. You can be aware of what's going on in your body, what kind of feeling reaction you're getting. You can be aware of the words, the content of what the person is saying. You can be aware of the body language and the tone of voice. and not just reacting to it, but I mean being aware of it, and then being aware of your own thoughts about what am I going to say back. You know, there's all this is going on at once in this process of listening.
Could you do something, say with Judy right now, like that exercise you're just mentioning, and see what would come up out of that, and maybe your own comments about it?
It would be easier for me if, yeah, okay, I can.
Okay.
Okay, Judy, what we're talking about is just each other. We're just getting acquainted, right? As if we'd met for the first time.
Okay.
And this gives me an opportunity to know a little bit more about you.
All right.
Tell me a little bit about your family.
I have a husband and 2 daughters and a son. And my oldest daughter is married. My son is in Maine working this summer. And my middle daughter is a caterer in Greenwich.
Anything you want to know about me?
Oh, yeah, I would like to know. I'd like to know if you have a family and what ages your children are, and how you found Wainwright House, and how you got involved in receptive listening.
Okay, I have 3 children, aged 37, 34, and 30. One is a surgeon, and one is a computer person, and the other is, my daughter is a painting contractor. How I got in receptive listening is I sort of fell into it and it felt like home. I think I was marked by having been in a Dewey school when I was young. And not quite like Mead School, but some similarities about learning through doing. And when I found receptive listening was that kind of program, it felt like home. We should stop.
Okay.
And then what you need to do, I almost said you two do it and then I can ask the questions. What we need are questions about for you to write, okay, if we were going to a costume party, right off the top of your head without thinking twice, what kind of costume would I wear?
Fairy godmother.
Wonderful. Okay. And off the top of your head, if money were no object, where would I tend to take a vacation?
The Caribbean.
Beautiful. Yeah, see, now you see, she has intuited or surmised or figured out a whole bunch of things about me that are right on, that don't have anything to do with how old my kids are. You know, so it's a demonstration for us to learn that this kind of stuff is going on in us all the time. If we are just more aware of it, we have that much more at our command. We're much freer.
Very good.
Actually, Joy is right on in terms of brain research and what she's saying, because of all the sensory inlets, the ears, the nose, and the mouth. The ears seem to be the ones that go to all of the brains. There are in fact 3 brains that we have inside the skull, and the ears are open to all of them all of the time.
I didn't know that.
It's wonderful. You can't shut them. They're open. They're taking impulses in all the time. And you're absolutely right. They are going into the feeling brain, and to the logical brain, and to the image intuitive brain, and to this deeper old brain where we have our patterns and our habits and our belief systems and our dreams, incidentally, which is why you may record a lot during the day that you don't have time to process up here in the higher brains during the day, and at night you do these wonderful things with
And that's all coming in through the ears.
That's all coming in through the ears. So it's lovely, because you're absolutely right. We have 400 billion cells in there, and the ears are what comes in through the ears is stimulating them all the time. Of course, we get other things in through the skin too, but the ears do reach all of them. So, absolutely, that's what happens. The stimulation goes on in all of them.
There seems to be more passive listening today in a way that has probably never been before in history, in the sense of we listen to TV or audio tapes where there's no real person there. And I wonder if that has an effect on the way we hear another person. We get in sort of the habit of not tuning in quite the same way.
I think it's true that the right brain and the feeling brain need a real person for the reasons that Joy just mentioned, because we're doing a lot more besides listening just with our ears. We are intuiting, and that's a way of inner listening. And we also are the face. Everything that's right here, it tells about our emotions, our feelings. some of us are real good at keeping our faces just straight so that no one will read
Stone face.
or listen to our feelings. But if I'm with you, then I'm really, I guess we could broaden the listening to perceiving, and I can see your face, and I can know a little bit about what your feelings are, and I can look at you and get some intuition, some glimpses of who you might be. So just to listen auditorially is in fact limiting, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Although you do get tone of voice with that, which can be very important,
tone of
volume
voice,
and tone of voice.
Yes.
But this was very dramatically demonstrated to me during the Nixon-Kennedy debates. I did not own a television before that, and I saw those debates on somebody else's television. And the things that came through about those people, seeing them, seeing their body language, and watching their faces, was so much more than I could have got from reading what they said the next day in the New York Times. It was a dramatic addition to have the vision there too. Although I realize that I'm not talking about what you brought up. What you brought up is the passive listening, where there's just so much input coming in all the time that we learn to tune a lot of it out. And I have run across people who tune it out when they don't plan to. It's just a pattern of it's too much to take in, and just tune some of it out and go with a simplified version. We do that all the time. You know, we're sitting here on this platform and we're not aware of the color of the rug or how bright the lights are in a certain area. We're just focusing on certain other things. So there's always a lot that we could perceive that we're not taking in. Some part of us, I guess, is taking it in.
I think that's a very good point, which is that apparently we do take it all in. Everything that we hear, maybe since we were born, maybe before we were born, is stored down there, which I think is rather exciting and mind-blowing at the same time.
Which is interesting why in somebody who has observed, for instance, an auto accident or a death, can be under hypnosis, can remember everything about the scene, whereas they thought they didn't remember anything about it. It's all there.
Yeah.
How can we access more of those things that we have observed? Have you any thoughts on that?
I have. I've been aware that I've been talking about awareness and haven't defined what I meant by that. My sense of what awareness is that sort of sense of perspective where your mind is observing what you are observing, if that is not confusing. Can you say that better in terms of how the mind does that?
No, I think that you've got it. We call it the inner observer, or the
witness.
Yeah, the witness, or as though we learn to be aware of where our focus is, so that we can watch. We actually watch what we're doing. We observe. And brain research, they haven't, as far as I know, they haven't found out exactly where that is.
Yes.
But it's something.
Will the real self please step up?
Exactly, exactly. Where it hangs out, we don't seem to know. We call it the third eye sometime in mysticisms, but there does seem to be this inner observer who sort of watches and listens and hears, and inner listening and inner watching.
It is a capacity of the personality or the brain, anyway. Whether there is a separate entity that is that, I don't know, but
yeah,
anybody can do it.
Yeah, how about ESP? You know, you hear about extrasensory perception, and you've done some study on this. And do they have they proved that in laboratories that people actually do that?
Yeah, they do actually do it. And I wouldn't want to say that we know exactly what happens, because I don't know that we do. But apparently it really exists. And what we do know is that we are a form of energy. All matter is energy, and energy is around us and out here. And there are waves in energy and wavelengths, and sound is one of them, and light. And we have the capacity to perceive. Some of us who have either been born this way and continue to develop it, or have learned to develop it. Intuition is a form of ESP, really, in the sense that there is no proof. We can't prove it, but it's there, and it's whole, and it's real, and it is absolutely true. You know, intuition is inner knowing, and it is in us and it is around us, and the scientists aren't agreed, as far as I know, about why we have it.
I've had experiences where I've thought of somebody that I haven't thought of for months and
Right.
months, and then they'll call on the phone that afternoon.
Right.
And it's really amazing to think how that could happen.
Right. We are apparently united in consciousness. And since this isn't a program on consciousness, we probably better leave it there. It's a very big topic.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's another listening, though. You were listening
Yes.
to that person, weren't you? I always wonder when that happens to me, who started it? Did that person start thinking about me and I heard them? Or did I start thinking about them and they heard me and then called? You know,
Right, right.
But whichever way, there is that sense of connection if you acknowledge it and watch what's going on in your head when you're at rest. I don't mean resting, I mean in pauses between when you're concentrating on something else. There's that kind of thing that happened.
Sounds good. I'd like to know a lot more about that.
I find that is one of the joys of doing the dishes. That I can do that automatically, and then I can be in touch with whatever comes in. Let whatever comes in be noticed. And I don't have to focus totally on the dishes.
Very good.
Maybe that's what's happening in meditation. It's another kind of listening. Listening to our inner self.
The vibrations of the emotional system is a form of inner listening. What am I feeling? What are my feelings doing? What is my feeling vibration doing? And it's one that a lot of us aren't very comfortable with. But it's a form of inner listening or inner looking. Actually, inner listening is probably better because it is vibration. The brain behind here, which is our emotional brain. We actually have an emotional brain in our brain, which is like the head has a heart finally, which is lovely, I think. And it vibrates and it gives us information. Are we going to listen to that information or not? And many of us in our culture have decided that it's hard or painful or we don't know how to, or have made a decision not to. But there are all these lovely ways of finding out more. And I think all of the things that we have, all of these 400 billion odd cells vibrating together, are meant to serve us. And the question is, will we listen inside? Will we remove ourselves from the outside world enough and be comfortable enough with it to listen to see what's going on in there, to give us information about ourselves in the world? And yeah, I could get really excited about inner listening.
I'm wondering if you'd say, if I wanted to improve listening to this part of my brain, how would you say I would go about that?
If you're talking about the feeling part,
I
the
am.
feeling vibrations, then it's like everything else, it's practice. And
what do I practice?
You practice, first of all, slowing down, which you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that may, in fact, be what happened with Bill and me. We connected emotionally, which
Yes.
was to slow into the vibration of our connection. And that's one of the things I've noticed, that if you are vibrating with emotions and somebody gives you logic, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
And if you both will vibrate with emotions, you're much more likely to have an exchange. If Bill is telling me how he feels deeply about something, and I'm sharing how I feel deeply, sooner or later we're going to vibrate together.
And then you get that sense of connection, or that sense of intimacy or openness.
Well, this is the brain of connection.
Oh, it is.
And it vibrates, and as it vibrates, it sends waves out. And so you may have noticed that the way people connect with political candidates, for instance, there was a lot of talk about the two candidates and whether or not they were emotional enough. And when you learn to vibrate with this emotional brain, you get stirred in your stomach. You affect people. And so that's a beautiful kind of connection, which leads to profound listening. And to answer your question very specific, it is right behind here. It's right behind the face, which is, so much of the face does emotions, smiling and laughter and breathing and smelling. That's doesn't have anything to do with listening, but you have those wonderful smells and you go right into your long-term memory, and a smell from your grandmother's house or something. That's because the long-term memory it has its roots here too in the emotional brain. So if you slow down to slower wavelengths, and then if you will allow yourself to be affected from your memory or from your vision brain, from your right brain, by beautiful music, or by beautiful sunset, or by remembering a great love, or a great feeling of happiness or sadness, you can be affected. And so once you're good at it, all you have to do is slow down and open the vibrations, and you can have the effect of being in your feelings.
Well, what if all I did was just lengthen and slow down my breathing, which I can do without a sunset around, or
that would help.
I could do any
that would
time.
help
Is
too.
that one way of
Yes.
slowing down that would help?
If meditation is up and out, which it often is, then moving into these deeper brains is sort of slowing and down and in. And it feels very similar.
No wonder it's hard to do in our fast-paced culture.
Exactly, exactly. You know, that we move, we have our feelings, and we move through them quickly, and we whip up to our logical brain where it feels safe, because we got A's in the
Yes.
logical brain.
Yes.
So we know about that one, we know if we're good in it or not. And it feels better there than it does in our feelings, where we feel kind of lost.
Visualization is something that you've worked with, I think. Could you say a little bit about that and how that works?
It's really the right hemisphere of the neocortex, and it functions by getting glimpses of the whole, and quite randomly, so that when you move into what we call a right hemispheric space, we begin to get images. I suppose the clearest way of our noticing that is athletes who we watched the Summer Olympics this summer, and we will see athletes closing their eyes and visualizing themselves going through their sport and doing it successfully and beautifully. And scientists tell us that that is in fact practice for the brain, and they will be able to do the act better, the sport better, if they visualize. And deep breathing helps you to visualize, and then you just create a picture in your brain. Either put it there or wait for one to come. And of course we do it all day long anyway. I mean, while we're stuck in the traffic, we'll visualize what we're going to make for dinner, or
Yes.
while we're vacuuming, you know, we create a whole scenario that we're going to have with our teenager when they
How
get
does
home.
that relate to the listening?
Well, it's again, it's inner listening, and sometimes it is in fact, we do in fact get words instead of images, or and that seems to come from intuition. When you ask people about how they receive their intuition, some people say, I hear whole sentences or whole concepts or whole ideas, and others say, I see something, I see a picture. So I think it's all sort of related to inner listening, and it seems to come in different forms with different people. We all have our favorite forms, I think.
I
You
tend
think
to,
if we listen more inside, we're better listeners outside?
Oh,
too?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, emphatically so. Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely true. Yeah, to be outside here all the time is to miss a lot of the nuance and a lot of the richness in communication, I think.
I want to say that you don't have to have a lot of courses to learn how to do this. As you were talking about the rehearsing and the athletes, I remembered as a teenager I used to do a lot of diving. And you know, you stand at the back of the board with your arms down, and I remember that it was a low board, and I had to have thought very clearly just what I was going to do before I started the approach, or I'd lose it, because there wasn't time. You know, as a split second, the whole
That's
dive is
right.
over with and you're in the water. If you don't have your mind together so that your body knows cooperatively what you're going to do before you start, it doesn't work. And I just, you know, I didn't know any of this theory, and I just discovered that that's what I had to do.
We all do this naturally. That's the beauty, is that we all have our visions when we're children. We know how to do that already. In fact, I think many of us, most of us, are probably strongly intuitive and may have extrasensory perception when we're very young. But then the world comes along and sends us to school, and at school they tell us that there's one reality and that this is it. And in fact, this is the way trees need to be drawn, and this is the way you make stars to put on the Christmas tree, and we lose that capacity. And teachers and parents say to us, oh, isn't it cute that you have a good imagination, darling, you know, or you can't have that imaginary friend anymore. It's time to get serious about life or get real with life. And that's when it begins to sort of shut down. And then we spend a lot of time as adults getting it back again.
I had an interesting experience like that. I took some lessons with a man by the name of Tim Galloway, who was a Harvard, I think he's the captain of the tennis team there.
Tennis, yeah.
And somebody just, that we had a partner, and they threw balls to us one after another. We were supposed to hit them over the net as quickly as we could, but not be aware where they went. And but the only thing we had to do was to watch until they stopped bouncing. And this guy that was assisting him said, "You didn't notice that one there that bounced out. You didn't keep watching it." And I thought, oh yeah, I didn't, because our tendency, if it goes out, we say, "Oh, that's bad shot. I don't want to see myself that way." It gets back to the self-esteem again. And so I began to just sort of look what was in and what was out, and pretty soon I was just hitting them one right after another, right across the net, and sort of getting back into that intuitive sense that it's really incredible if we can listen to our bodies that way, what can happen. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah,
Very complex
we
thing.
know already, but we tend to make it too complicated by thinking how far we pull our arm back or something like that.
Exactly. That part of the brain does know how to move our bodies in space, and the problem is that we have forgotten. And when you say getting back in touch with, I suppose that's another way of being in sync with or listening to and responding to.
Yes.
I think that's a good word for it. Yeah.
Talking about learning, I know you've done this brain research, and I wondered about these subliminal tapes, like you stop smoking or lose weight or something like that. Are they effective?
I wouldn't want to comment for sure, but there are many people who say they're very effective. And I guess what happens is that the subconscious mind, this deeper brain, picks up the information and then uses the information, stores the information, and then uses it. And of course that's a good place for it to go, because this is the pattern brain, and this is where we have our habits and patterns and addictions, and this is where we can shift out of. So in fact, if we hear over and over again that this is an addiction we don't need to have, subconsciously in this deep brain while we're sleeping, there's every reason why it could affect us in our everyday life, our waking life.
How about those tapes being played while we're sleeping? Does that have an effect?
There's some pretty good evidence that it does. I have had no personal experience with that, but there's been some really quite good work done with that in Europe, and a lot of excitement about it. So if in fact the ears are always open and we do in fact have this storing capacity, then it would seem to me that it could in fact, it makes sense to me that it would be effective. Yeah, it depends on what we do with this linear brain though. If we, logical brain, if we during the day say, I wonder if that's working, and look, I still want a chocolate candy, it's not working, and I thought it would work by now, and see, look at me. I mean, we can sabotage ourselves, and we do all the time. So I think it depends on how much of your brain you're using to help make this work. But it's not an area of great expertise.
I'm a
for
person
me.
who likes to be more in charge of my learning than the subliminal tapes. I'm not comfortable with that at all as a method for learning. It is, though, a method that we use for ourselves often in the course that I teach, whereas we have people write something and then they read it to someone else, or they read it to themselves. The process of hearing it again gets it into you, or you have something that you say to yourself, an affirmation, trying to get over one of those assumptions that's hard on your self-esteem, you know, that really isn't true anymore about you, to make an affirmation aloud each day while you're showering or doing the dishes or whatever. Hearing yourself say it out loud does seem to make a difference, and is something that you can do and be in charge of yourself. This is where I like to function, where I feel that I can make the changes that I want to make for myself.
You reminded me of something that's really important around listening and learning, and that is there are some children in our schools, usually what we call right hemisphere preference children, who really do need to hear it before they can learn it. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's so important for schools to have both written material for students who learn by sight and auditory material for students who learn by hearing. And I have recommended to many students that they read it out loud into a tape recorder and then play the tape recorder back, and it's much more effective.
Yes.
So one of the ways in which you can find out about your own learning style is to see, do you prefer hearing to reading? And there are strong preferences. And
Yes,
if you
indeed.
give a hearer written material, they're not very comfortable
Yeah.
with it.
It's more than a preference, I think. It's an ability. I very early learned that I needed to sit down front in class. Not
In
because
order
I
to
couldn't hear, but so I wouldn't be distracted, because I learned by hearing. I still do. If I'm learning the computer, I don't want to have to sit and read that book about, you know, and all those words and try to do it. If somebody can show it to me and I can hear them tell me about it, I get it much faster.
Me too, yeah. And if I can experience it, which you mentioned earlier,
Yes.
yeah, I'm even happier.
You get the muscles in it, right?
Exactly. If you
Yes.
get your body in it and get your ears involved in it, and then, of course, if you also get your sight, it's fabulous.
So when I want you to listen to me,
Yeah, exactly.
get
Grab
the
my
body
arm.
in it.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
another one along that line of the body-mind connection that we engage in, which is visualizing an activity that we have done where we felt successful, where we felt good about ourselves. And we go through it. We act it out like mime. Whether we have the words or the topic, it doesn't matter. We have it in our heads. We remember when we did well, and we go through the demonstration for two people that are watching us and sharing with us. And then remember a time when you didn't do well, when things went wrong, and you act that one out. And then the next thing, and this is the telling time, is when you try to do the positive thing, reenact the positive thing, remembering the time when you didn't do well. And I've seen people get partway through a gesture and they're like in suspended animation, because their bodies will not do the gesture that's the positive, outgoing, whatever it was that they were doing well, when they're still thinking the negative thing. If you ever need any evidence for attitudinal healing or changing by changing your assumptions in your own head or what you're telling yourself, this is an exercise that will demonstrate that beyond all doubt. Your body just won't do it. You can't do the positive thing while you're thinking about the negative last time or 3 times you failed.
Yeah.
The more we talk here, the more I see that the way we feel about ourselves inside and our perceptions and our
Yes.
patterns, traditions, these sorts of things are very important in the way we listen.
Yes.
And let's focus back for a few minutes on what happens, though, with people out there and how we respond to them. I'm thinking, suppose there's somebody that's talking, sort of almost abusing us by talking and talking and talking, and we can hardly get a word in edgewise. What do you do in a situation like that to handle that within yourself? Can you do this in a polite way to deal with that listening?
I think with teenagers sometimes, I've been willing to say, hold on for a second, I can't hear you anymore. This is what I think you've said, and would you be willing to let me digest that now for a while, and not go on? I think it's important to say where you are, and I think that helps. I'm thinking mostly of kids, although adults it probably would be useful too, to say, I really am saturated, that's it. I can't take any more. And I need some silence now, I need some quiet. I think that probably is a good way of letting people see, and certainly for kids, letting kids see that they have a right to take care of themselves by saying, I can't listen to you right now. It's just really hard for me. And I think kids are talked at a lot, and I think it is often hard for them.
Yes.
Yeah.
They have to listen at school all day long. They want
Yeah.
to get it out. Another way of dealing with that, I think, is to try to, not to be sharp because it came in edgewise, but to be an acknowledgement that you've heard what they've said, the last thing they've been talking about. It'll as it slows people down, it gives a reflection to a person who's just, going on and on and on with the mouth. I think that usually comes from a person who does not feel at all good about himself and is looking for some kind of measure of acceptance by demanding that attention. So if you give it, and you give it back to them, you give them themselves, is the way I put it when I'm thinking to myself about that. Then they tend to slow down and not need to talk so much.
So our own honesty about where we are is
Yes.
very important in helping the other person speak and to promote the communication.
I think we have a lot to do with listening too, particularly in the schools. I think that we haven't had courses in listening. Now, how do you listen? And when is it time to say, that's all I can hear right now? And of course, we certainly don't give kids permission to say, you know, that is the worst lecture I've ever heard. I went to sleep 3 times, and I need to get another way because that was just hideous. We don't give them permission to say that, which may be why we don't teach listening courses, because we don't want to get into it.
I'm glad you said that instead of me, since that's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
I've just been looking at Kevin Murphy's book about effective listening, which was written with an orientation to the need for listening in the corporations and in any business relationships. We've been talking family listening and listening to yourselves, but listening to others that you're working with, he asserts, and I certainly believe, is very important, and something that I think is coming back into play in some of the business enterprises, and they're looking for ways to improve their listening ability. I talked to a man who was head of a community college in Cleveland, Ohio, who said that they had been given money by the state because the businesses said that they were losing so much money because their employees and their foremen were not listening. And it was costing the companies a lot of money in terms of errors and in terms of difficulties that had to be overcome later on. So I think the time is coming when we're becoming more aware that we need to focus more on our listening.
How do we know that we're hearing another person correctly? I know we've been talking about this already to some extent, but how do we know what they're saying is what we're hearing? Is there any way
We
to
call it
check that?
checking out.
Okay, checking out. What do you do about that?
Again, it's one of those artificial slowdowns, but now you've given me such a good excuse for why to slow down, because it gives an opportunity for our brain to come to that point where you meet connection with a person, and that's an important part of listening. An important outcome is that feeling of connection that we get. Checking out is a process by which we say, well, now, wait a minute, you know, it's one of these escalating things maybe, and you want to slow it down, and you say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I heard you rightly. Let me try to tell you what I think you said. Now, when I do that, I'm acknowledging not that you didn't say it clearly, but that I have all these assumptions in me and all these cultural conditions and this history about how it was done in my family and all that. And so my use of words, even the same language of words, is going to be different from what you've used. You might have hit a certain word that triggers feelings in me from an old time, is going to send my listening way off base. So when I say, let me be sure I'm understanding you, then I try to say to you what you have said to me, the essence of it, not the words. In my words, I try to say to you, and then you may say, well, no, that isn't quite what I meant. And then you try to say it back to me, and then I say it back to you again. This may take only a couple of times, or it may take 3 or 4. But then we finally get to the point where on that one item that you were saying that I got lost on, or thought I might have perceived incorrectly, we got it so we're both in agreement on it, then we go on the conversation. So it's like you're talking back and forth, and then you get this little where you step side and you get it clear on that one, and then you go back to conversation again. Yeah. And that's a very effective tool.
When I work with couples, I tend to have them, each one listen about 5 minutes and keep feeding back, and then reverse it and have the other one do that. And that seems to work better than if it goes back and forth like a ping pong ball. It's,
yes.
They feel understood, and then they feel they can hear. I sort of think it's like the emotions are like a balloon in our heads that sort of crowd up against our ear drums, and when the emotions get smaller, the balloon gets smaller, and we can hear again.
That's really important, because the emotional brain doesn't have language. And so in order to move emotions to expression, unless we're willing to scream, growl, cry, snarl, those kinds of things, those are the only languages. We have to translate the emotions to words, and I find that words are sometimes so inadequate to express emotions. And in your couple therapy, I'm sure that you must have that experience where the feelings are so strong, and they are to take feelings which are pervasive and sort of vibrate through the whole system and translate them into these little things, these little words that come one after another, and start with a capital N with a period. It's a very profoundly difficult thing to do when you're in deep emotion. And it's a really good point, I think, because you lose something in the translation, almost always. And also when you're listening, if you're already in an emotional space, it's very difficult to hear what the words really mean from the other person's point of view. It would be nice if we could express with our faces, and we do, you know, a lot about our feeling, but I wish that we had even more expression so that we wouldn't have to make the translation, because it's so difficult to understand sometimes.
It's complicated. That whole question of trying to communicate with words when we're strong into feelings is complicated by the fact that we are often not clear about our intentions. What is it we really want in this conversation? Are we even clear with ourselves? That's listening to self again. But we're definitely taught never to tell your intentions. That would be so revealing that the other person would win or whatever. Who says it's a contest? But anyway, if you're trying to communicate, communicating your intentions, being in touch with what they are, what you want for yourself, for the other person, for the two of your relationship, or whatever it is, what it is that you want, if you can say that as an I statement. What I really want out of this conversation is so-and-so, or what I am looking for from you, or what I want for myself is, and when you get that out, a whole lot of words don't have to be gone into. It sort of makes the wheels turn around, the wheels of conversation, turn around a little faster.
One of the things I do with couples is that I say there are two basic reference points in a relationship that need to get clear. And I think there are lots of parts in a relationship, like there are lots of parts in a jigsaw puzzle, and the two basic reference points we have in a jigsaw puzzle is we get the pieces with the straight sides, make a boundary or a frame of some sort, and then put the pieces that are the same color tone together. And just by hanging in with those two things, all the other parts tend to fall into place. And I think that in a relationship, if we hang in with the two basic reference points, which are to give information about our own territory with the I message, or to give understanding to the other person's feelings. And there's sort of a play back and forth between those two things. And as we do that, things seem to get better. And if our own emotions get so strong that we can't listen, then I usually say to somebody, well, okay, tell them to say, if I've listened to you for 5 minutes, now will you listen to me and feedback what you hear me saying?
Yeah, I think it's lovely to be able to say to people, I have a lot of feelings, people that you're comfortable with, I'm having a lot of feelings. Will you just stay here and listen to me while I have my feelings? Which may mean that you don't have to respond or fix them, or, but most people are kind of scared of other people's feelings. So I find that if you have a friend or a relationship...
If you have a feeling, I have to fix it, right?
Yeah.
I have to make it all better.
If we could get out of that, wouldn't it be...
Or I tell you what to do.
Yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could move out of that?
Yes, it would.
So that we could just express our feelings, and I could say to you, Bill, I'm having all these feelings today. Are you willing to just sit next to me and listen to them? And just nod like you're doing right now. And that would make me feel so good if I could move through that.
Do you know the AA program, the Alcoholics Anonymous, began like that because Bill W., who was one of the founders, went and talked to Bob W. about his alcoholism, and he just kept saying, this is the way I feel as an alcoholic, and this is how difficult it is. And in the end he says, okay, that's all, I just want to be heard. And he starts to walk out, and Bob says, wait a minute, I want to tell you my side now, too.
That's great. It's a lovely story.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Well, we're getting close to our time here, and we got about 5 minutes more, and I wonder if we maybe could think a little bit about, in summary, what we've talked about here, and are there things that each of you maybe haven't said that you'd like to say that just might be useful in summarizing what we said, or adding something that you already have thought about but maybe not had a chance to speak about?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind is we haven't said anything about what we call higher self, or that inner wisdom, that source of inner wisdom that we have. We talked about that position of witness, but beyond that is, in my belief, available to us a source of understanding and wisdom and guidance that is in each one of us. And the question becomes then, how do you listen to that? And there are a number of ways of listening to that, but maybe I should just name one or two.
Yeah, would you please?
We sometimes will use spontaneous drawing, particularly with your non-writing hand, as a way of listening to that part of our inner selves that is that source of wisdom. And answers to our questions.
Would you ask a question and then
Yes.
see what your hand draws?
Yes, and you just let it go. Or you might make you know, a thing that looks like a daisy, and make each one of those petals be somebody with whom you have an important relationship, you know, a husband, a child, a mother that's ill, you know, somebody at work, and you know, you put them all in there, and you make some kind of a gesture. It doesn't have to be a symbol even, just a gesture of what is the nature of that relationship. How would you characterize that in a symbol? And then you will find that you get surprising things. It's always, to me, important when the learning that I receive comes as a surprise. It's not something that I could have thought up,
Yeah.
right? Do you recognize that? That's one of the things that I treasure as a feeling of connection with this higher self.
Okay, thank you
So
very
Art
much.
Way is one way of doing it.
Good. Judy, how about you?
I would say that, in summary, if we can be clear about who we are, which is a very big thing, and then learn to express it in a way that we feel comfortable with, using I messages. I see, I think, I imagine, I feel, I am. And then to help other people who we are in relationship with speak the same way. Who are you? How do you think? How do you feel? Could be awfully good ways of sort of breaking through this, who you are is affecting me. So if we can be clear about who we are, each of us, and help each other do that, I think communication and listening would be much more open.
Could you give an example of someone saying that?
Yeah, I could say, I imagine, Bill, that you may be feeling tired this evening after a long day, and you might be happy to be thinking about going home. And that could open up a conversation where you could share with me some of your feelings about what you've done today and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I could do the same thing with me. Yeah.
Okay, that's very good. Appreciate that. Well, it's certainly been good to have you be with us this evening, and we hope that this has been of interest to you in ways that will be helpful to you in the practical living of your life. If you have any other topics that you feel would be of interest for us to share with you on perceptions, we hope that you will contact this station and let us know about it. We try to do things that will be useful and helpful in practical daily living and help us to understand better ourselves and who we are as human beings in today's world. Hope you'll tune in again. Thank you.